We meet people who fly off the handle. We meet people who shut down. We meet people who are very difficult. You know, it is a rare family that doesn't have a drug addict, alcoholic, disturbed person. You know, one thing I like to say when I give a lecture, are there any normal people who come from normal families in the audience? And sometimes one or two people raise their hands and say, can I please come to your family for Thanksgiving? Because I've never been to a normal family. My name is Bessel van der Kolk. I'm a psychiatrist, neuroscientist. I have been studying trauma for about 15 years now. I've treated a whole variety of different traumatized populations, see trauma in many different countries around the world, and I'm the author of the book The Body Keeps the Score. It's important for people to realize that not every mental health professional knows what we're talking about here. The mainstream system of psychiatry, psychology is that there is something wrong with you and I need to fix you. That's a very different attitude than dealing with trauma. Around that time that I first started to work for the VA, a group of us started to define what trauma is and started to define what happens to people. 1978 was the year, and the Vietnam War was over by about 6 or 7 years. The very first day that I met Vietnam veterans, I was just blown away. They kept referring back to their dead comrades. Their hearts seemed to be with the people who were no longer around. They had a hard time loving their wives and girlfriends. They had a hard time being in any way meaningfully involved in the present. And these were guys who were my age, who were smart and competent, but they clearly were just a shadow of their former self. And what was also really striking is they were sort of passive much of the time, and then people told them something that was disappointing, and they went from 0 to 10 and blew up and became extremely angry. Something seemed to have.
So far, this is having me think a lot of the military and the army. And I have my grandfather went to Vietnam, had one tour there, and my uncle was in the Marines and luckily never was deployed in any way. But yeah, was in the Marines. And so they talk about it a lot over like family dinners and stuff. How boot camp, the way that like people are initiated into the army and are weed out who's strong enough, who's not strong enough, is meant to whittle you down as a person. Like so that it's like boot camp, the way that my uncle has described it, it's this system where you the military takes an individual and wears them down until they're absolutely nothing, and then they build them back up how they want. And how they want is like unified army, everything's this way, my way or the highway, you have to do it this way or you're out. Like that type of thing. And so
it's interesting because in a combat situation you need everyone to follow orders no matter what. Which is crazy to think about. Like reminds me of I always saw that in the new Napoleon Bonaparte movie that came out a while ago, and it was just depicting warfare in that time period where you just had two lines of soldiers standing at each other, and then eventually you would charge.
So stiff.
And it's like if you were the front line, you knew I have a very, 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 very high chance of dying, and I just need to go.
Dude.
And it's like
it almost feels like brainwashing in a sense.
You have to be you have to be brainwashed, or you have to be so like, I guess you could call it brainwashing, you could also call it just so devoted to your cause, and
I think
you will die for your
there's
cause.
probably a mix of like people, huge mix of people through any times in warfare. Like because one is can be so beautiful if you're like really for a right cause, you're actually
I'm dying for my family right now.
Yes, like that is
devotion.
very courageous. But then there's the other side of brainwash, like like you're
We're
not
secretly here to steal oil from a different country.
Yeah. or like you know, you have a ruler who like everyone's following, but like they're just actually seeking power, not anything more. Like, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. This has been fascinating so far.
Yeah. Shall we zing on?
Zing on.
But to them, that made it very hard for them to modulate their responses to the environment. My colleagues and I started to think about how is what these guys suffer from different from what other people who are in psychiatry textbooks suffer from. So I dug up a book that was written in 1941 by Abram Gardner, who had been working with real poor soldiers. He wrote, these guys suffer from a physioneurosis. Their bodies continue to re-experience that very terrible, frightening situation, and that event keeps coming back in terms of images, behaviors, and physical sensations. So that became the core of our definition of PTSD. We write, these people have been exposed to an extraordinary event that's outside of normal human experience. And in retrospect, that shows us how ignorant and narrow-minded we were, because it turned out that this is not an unusual experience at all.
Wow.
Trauma is actually, unlike what we first thought, extremely common. 1 out of 5 women in America has a history of sexual molestation. Even a lot of men have histories of sexual molestation. 1 out of 4 kids get beaten very hard by their parents. 1 out of 8 kids see physical fights between their parents. People usually think about the military when they talk about trauma, but when we started to work with inner city kids, the amount of trauma that these kids experience was just unspeakable. The nature of trauma is that an experience enters into your ears, into your skin, into your eyes, and it goes down into a very primitive part of your brain that automatically interprets what's going on. Is this dangerous or is this safe? An event becomes traumatic when there is nothing you can do to stave off the inevitable, and your body starts automatically going to a state of fight, flight, or collapse. The lingering effect of trauma is that you continue to react to mild stressors as if your life is in danger. And so you tend to become hyper-reactive. Somebody may irritate you in the supermarket. You may develop road rage. You may have a difficult time putting up with misbehavior from your spouse or your kids. And most people actually are barely aware or not aware at all that their reactions that they're having right now are actually rooted in experiences they have had before. That event itself is over.
Whoa. Yeah, I needed to pause.
Yeah, I just had the thought there that I feel like there are big generational differences, at least in Western/American culture, of expressing and recognizing trauma and their effects. Because I know with my parents and their parents, there is very little speak of trauma or any psychological impacts from anything unless it's war or death or any of the big T trauma topics. And I definitely see a lot of like older generations like having certain like trauma reactions, as this guy is saying, but like sweep it under the rug and say like, oh, this is just normal because X, Y, and Z, and
almost like comparing it to the other types of trauma too. Be like, oh, like this isn't war. This is like something that happens a bunch.
Yeah, comparison to diminish it. Yeah, and it almost feels like an excuse for taking care of yourself in the way that you react from trauma.
Yeah, I was about to say, I just feel like any intense emotional state that we experience creates a pattern inside of us. And it's like, no matter how small you think it is, like we were playing round net yesterday. Spike ball is like our favorite sport that we play. Mitch and I are on the same team. Tess is also super good at round net. And there was one moment where like I made like a really stupid hit, and Mitch's face looking at me was just so like disappointed because it was like a sick play up until that point. And I like really got down inside of myself for a second. I had this moment of like, he literally just gave me a look of like, oh, I'm disappointed in you. And that completely, like, my whole emotion flipped into a direction. And then I had this really cool moment that, like, and so for like 2 or 3 plays after that, it was sticking with me, and I was like really down. And then I had this moment of embodied spirituality where I'm like, or embodied psychology of, I'm not my emotions. Like, my emotions are something that come and I can experience, and I don't need to act on my emotions. I don't need to believe the emotion. I can choose how to see the emotion. And it feels like that is such a, like, of course, the type of trauma that we're talking about in this sort of video is really deep, but I love that point because the thing that all of us are experiencing, every single one of us, no matter what, even if you haven't experienced anything that seems extreme in your life, you have these patterns of emotional triggers and like learning how to deal with those and rewire the way that you I like that he said it goes to a deep part of your brain that interprets the event as something. And it's like, I interpreted your look as I am not doing well. And like I like, and then like all these thoughts of doubt come up, which is really interesting.
I remember that moment too. It was like we were going up against a really good server, and if a server starts acing, it can go like 1, 2, 3, 4 points gets racked up.
If they just get into flow.
Yeah, if they just get into flow. And Eli gets a sick up on the server. So I was more
like I stopped a really good serve.
Yeah, which is like so impressive. And it's just like
and then he gave me a really good set.
Yeah.
And I just did a stupid hit. Like try to
Yeah. And it was like it was less a feeling of like, it was mostly a feeling of like, why did you do that to yourself? Like, you just got a crazy good up, put the ball away. Yeah. Like that just saved us a serving run.
Yeah. And then they did go on a serving run and destroyed us.
Yeah.
That was tough.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. It is great. Like, it's just I notice in myself too, just a slight thing can have me thinking of something for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And that's like this inability in myself to chop things like right when they come up. Because
what do you mean by chop things right when they come up?
I feel like ideally you like I've had times where I feel really, really good and like in myself where I don't let things linger.
Like a negative situation like that will pop into you.
Yeah, like I have such like softness and love inside of myself, and it also like somehow creates this ability to have like hard line things inside of like, this comes in and I am not going to give it the light of day if it's not a true thing, if I don't need to do anything about it, if I don't need to say sorry to someone, whatever, and then it's just like slice and like kind of a cold feeling thing that is really healthy, I think.
Yeah.
But that I'm not able to do most days, especially if I'm in any way like attacked for something that I do, or like if someone is frustrated with the way I'm doing something, usually is how and then I'll just like ruminate over it for so long. Yeah, and it just like takes this huge effort for me to get over it. And it is such a slight thing, and it just shows that there's just like stuff, at least to me it feels like it shows that there's stuff inside that I've just held that I can let go of, and that the reason why I ruminate so much over those things is because of all the stuff that I've accumulated in my body. It feels like,
body keeps the score.
Yeah. Zing?
Zing.
But you continue to react to things as if you're in danger. So the big challenge of treating trauma is how do we help people to live in bodies that feel fundamentally safe?
What a different approach.
The tradition in mental health is to dismiss the reality of people's lives. For example, it's only in the past few years that people are beginning to talk about the impact of poverty, or the impact of racism, or the impact of unemployment. And people have sort of been labeling people, oh, there's something wrong with you, let me fix you. But if you go to a physician or a mental health practitioner who doesn't understand that, they're going to try to fix you with drugs or cognitive behavioral treatment to not do these crazy things anymore. It usually doesn't work very well. What is very clear is that being in a relationship where people can hear you, where you can talk about how badly you feel, where you can talk about your guilt, and where you can start opening up where these feelings come from, how all these feelings are, and how you develop these feelings in response to particular things that happen to you, that is actually quite helpful. Because you need to really develop a deep sense of, this is what happened to me. This is what I'm dealing with. And I need to take care of the wounds that I'm carrying inside of myself. This issue of self-compassion and really knowing that your reactions are understandable and are rooted in you getting stuck in the past is a terribly important part of beginning to recover from trauma. Most of us are survivors of one thing or another, some much worse than others. And so if people say, what do you wish your legacy were? They say, I want our society to know about trauma and to really do all the things that are necessary so that people who grow up under extreme adverse conditions can develop a brain and a mind that can help them to become full-fledged members of society. That's our big issue, and that's the big challenge that we have.
Get smarter, fast.
One of the things that popped into my mind was that trauma is a physiological and psychological response that feels evolutionary, that feels like it serves a purpose or has served a purpose throughout the course of human life, that makes you aware of these triggers or these things that make you feel like your life or your safety or your something is in danger. And I think that's a really nice way to look at trauma, and kind of destigmatizes it and adds to the like
it's your body trying to keep you safe.
Yeah. It's like a temporary solution perhaps for your body to regain control and regain safety, this feeling of protection perhaps. And that just, I feel like that mindset could help a lot of people recognize trauma in themselves regardless of magnitude and start the healing process.
Dude, that just made me think of an experience I had yesterday. The same way of thinking as what you were just saying, of I have had this experience in my heart area of a lot of tightness for 2 years. And I was looking at myself in the mirror after I took a shower yesterday, and I was just oh man, I talking to my body, wish we could do everything we can to get this out, because it feels like it needs to go out of me somehow. And then it just struck me that I had been treating what's going on in here as this disease that I have or something, instead of, and what I realized was it was my heart's trying to tell me something. My heart is trying to, just okay, your body has a trauma response because it's trying to keep you safe. My heart, if I recognize in that moment that it's telling me about the ways that parts of the world and life has totally broken my heart. Yeah. Yeah, because I've oftentimes only thought about it in terms of like emotional relationships, but then I had the revelation a few days ago that like work and working breaks my heart. Absolutely. Yeah.
And specifically, the work that you do isn't fulfilling. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah. And it's like unfulfilling doesn't even feel like it has ever fit the bill for me. Like it doesn't feel like strong enough, but breaks my heart is like that's it. Yeah. I see the world around me and like how everything happens, and it absolutely breaks my heart. And so like of course there's tightness in my chest, like my heart's trying to tell me this is how much pain all these things have brought. Yeah.
The body keeps the score.
Yeah.
That makes me think that another, just I guess a deepening of that point is that it's very natural that when you feel something poke into your leg, you look down at your leg and you're like, what's wrong? Like, what happened to my leg? Oh, there's a thorn in my leg. I need to take the thorn out of my leg. It's like a pain response is an indication of something here needs to be fixed.
Yeah, it needs attention.
It needs attention. And it reminds me too of like I have a lot of lower back pain at times, and it's just been like pretty consistent. And then it's only that pain that reveals to me like, oh, a lot of times throughout my day, I'm doing things where I'm not allowing my back to move the way it should. And like, I'm not creating that space for it and like prioritizing just like stretching and simple things like that. That then when I start doing those and getting into practice of them, the back pain reduces greatly. So it's like, yeah, seeing emotions, seeing thoughts, seeing pains as just like messengers, I think.
Like that they're serving you.
Yes.
Like serving you and showing you where those weak spots are.
And usually we try to push them away. We're like, I don't want to feel pain. I don't want it because it's uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, I've also learned that trauma begets trauma. I'm thinking of the generational curse of trauma, where it continues down your family line until someone is ready to feel it and heal it.
Feel it and heal it.
Yeah. Yeah, and trauma is something that I've learned is actually passed down through your genes, like through predispositions, to be very sensitive and aware of certain triggers. And that makes sense from like an adaptation perspective. Like if your whole family has been chased by wolves, in your pack, like of course you're gonna be, like everyone else is gonna be scared of wolves too in your family. And it makes me think about the people who are able to break the generational curse of trauma, and how difficult that must be, and just how easy it can be to accumulate so much trauma in and triggers to certain experiences. Like if your dad raises you and like uses corporal punishment and like beats you, like you're likely to use that same mechanism on your children because that's what you've learned, and maybe it worked a certain way. And it's really incredible to see people break out of that cycle and do the really, really hard work. Speaking for my dad, big props. Yeah, there's like there's a huge magnitude of appreciation for those people, and
and us. We're all doing it.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people who are interested in this channel are probably really into that as well. Yeah, and it's admirable, I think. I had a friend once that was just like, we were talking about stuff like this, and she was just like, yeah, you and I were cycle breakers. Like that, it's like a thing. Cycle breakers. And I was like, damn, cool. Like as an archetype. Yeah. was like, that's sick.
If you're working on that, huge props.
Yeah. Shout out to you.
Peace.
Peace and much
Much
love.
Much love.